Good morning and welcome to the Global Current. I'm Alex Krause.
And I'm Karina Taylor.
In news, the First Lady promotes female education in Asia.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is elected to a third term.
Attacks at the National Bardo Museum in Tunis.
In analysis, European countries join the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
EU meets in Paris to discuss curbing radicalization in European schools.
And the Global Current sits down with a panel of Seton Hall diplomacy students who recently studied abroad during a spring break trip to Ethiopia.
Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show.
And now Samantha Stevenson reports on First Lady Michelle Obama's trip to Asia to promote female education.
This week, First Lady Michelle Obama will be traveling to Japan and Cambodia to kick off the Obama administration's Let Girls Learn program. The goal of the program is to promote female enrollment in school and completion of education. In an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, the First Lady wrote, "We cannot address the issue of girls' education unless we are also willing to confront the complex issues that keep so many girls out of school in the first place. From female genital cutting/mutilation to early and forced marriage, to economic disincentives like unaffordable school fees and the loss of girls' household labor." The New York Times reports that Mrs. Obama will first stop in Tokyo and Kyoto to talk with Japan on a partnership to improve education for girls in developing countries. She will then travel to Siem Reap, Cambodia. Cambodia is one of 11 countries that the Peace Corps will focus on under the Let Girls Learn program during its first year, the remaining 10 being Albania, Benin, Burkina Faso, Georgia, Ghana, Moldova, Mongolia, Mozambique, Togo, and Uganda. The Peace Corps will also be traveling with Mrs. Obama to meet with its Japanese equivalent, the Overseas Cooperation Volunteers, to work together on improvements at the community level. Director of the Peace Corps, Carrie Hessler-Redley, alongside with Mrs. Obama, will meet with students and volunteers and see some of the community programs already in place to expand girls' access to education there. The Let Girls Learn program was first announced on March 3rd by President Obama. He announced the initiative at a press release at the White House, saying, "We're making it clear to any country that's our partner or wants to be our partner that they need to get serious about increasing the number of girls in school." This is Samantha Stevenson reporting for the Global Current.
Emily Livaday reports on the international reaction to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's third re-election.
On March 18th, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu claimed a surprising victory over the opposing Zionist Union Party candidate Isaac Herzog. According to Al Jazeera, Netanyahu and his Likud party were behind in exit polls. However, Netanyahu just won his third consecutive prime minister election and is locked in for another 2-year term. The Likud party also gained 30 seats in parliament. The left-leaning Zionist Union Party obtained 24 seats. With the prospect of an Iranian nuclear deal and the looming question of a Palestinian state, this election has been laden with controversy. Netanyahu visited the United States as part of his re-election campaign to plead with Congress to not strike up a deal with Iran. His talk was not well approved by the White House. According to Al Jazeera, Netanyahu stated on March 16th that he would not allow the creation of a Palestinian state in either the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. Herzog, Netanyahu's opponent in the election, openly criticized Netanyahu for his foreign policy and neglect of the Palestinian issue, reports the BBC News. The U.S. expresses a desire to work with Netanyahu to maintain Israel as a close ally. Fox News reports that Secretary of State John Kerry has called Netanyahu to congratulate him on his victory. Also, White House spokesman Josh Earnest shared a press conference that the U.S. and Israel will continue its friendship beyond the election.
U.S.-Israel relationship is not one that has been subject historically to partisanship, and not one that has been subject to intense partisan political debate, but rather because of our deep cultural ties, because of the deep ties between our people, because of our shared interests when it comes to national security in the Middle East, that the strong relationship between the United States and Israel will endure far beyond this upcoming election, or the election that's being held today.
This is Emily Livaday for the Global Current.
Karina Hendren reports on the attack at the National Bardo Museum in Tunis, Tunisia.
On March 18th, gunmen stormed the National Bardo Museum in Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. The BBC reports that there are 22 confirmed casualties, 2 Tunisians and 20 tourists from foreign countries. Italian, Polish, Spanish, German, South African, French, Japanese, and Colombian citizens were among those killed. This attack on civilians is unusual for Tunisia, a nation that has not experienced a similar attack since 2002, when 19 people were killed by an explosion at a synagogue in the resort of Jerba. Al-Qaeda took responsibility for the attack in 2002, but as of yet, no organization has taken responsibility for Wednesday's attacks. 2 supposed gunmen were killed by security forces, but security forces are still unaware if there were more gunmen involved. Prime Minister Habib Assid discussed the logistics of the attacks in a press conference.
The first findings show that 19 people were killed in the attack, including 17 foreign tourists. They are all of different nationalities: Polish, Italians, Germans, and Spanish, in addition to 2 Tunisians. The 2 terrorists were killed in the attack.
The Bardo National Museum in Tunis is one of Tunisia's main attractions in their tourism-centric economy. The museum, Tunisia's largest, was built in a 15th century palace. The museum itself contains 8,000 works, some of which are over 40,000 years old, according to the BBC. The New York Times reports that Tunisia's parliament is discussing new anti-terrorism laws. Some Tunisian officials speculate that the nearby parliament building was the intended target. A number of Tunisians have left to fight in Syria and Iraq, which has left many to worry that returning fighters will carry out attacks in Tunisia. Although the revolution in Tunisia led to a more democratic government compared to other Arab Spring countries, the New York Times has reported economic disruption, youth unemployment, and disdain towards the police forces since the revolution. ISIS has used this instability to its advantage. Last December, a video circulated which included 3 Tunisian IS fighters warning Tunisians that they would not live safely if Tunisia did not adopt Islamic law. According to the BBC, Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini offered her condolences to the victims' families and said that the EU would fully support Tunisia in the fight against terrorism. John Kerry also offered sympathies and stated that the U.S. would stand with Tunisia and continue to support the Tunisian government in its efforts to sustain secure and prosperous democracy. This is Karina Hendren for the Global Current.
And now, Vaughn Rogers analyzes how European countries have recently joined the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
France and Germany confirmed last Tuesday that they would apply for membership in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. As described by The Economist, AIIB is an international bank led by China, supported by 21 other countries for the sake of building infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific region. China's foreign ministry asserts that AIIB's policy will be transparent in this news conference.
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank will abide by the principles of openness, inclusiveness, transparency, responsibility, and equality regarding its governance structure and relevant operating policies.
The creation of AIIB has been controversial against the presence of the Asian Development Bank, raising questions for AIIB's necessity. The World Bank and ADB cautiously welcome the new bank, admitting it can fill an infrastructure need that they cannot, such as infrastructure in the LDCs, or least developed countries. The United Kingdom jumped to become a founding member, and, in turn, China is now investing in multi-billion-dollar projects like a new high-speed railway line in the UK. The United States and South Korea, a member of APEC, and Japan, the leader of ADB, sees these European countries' investments in the Chinese-led bank as a threat. There is a growing concern that instead of investing in projects around the region, that the projects will be concentrated on China, thus causing the U.S. to uncharacteristically criticize its ally, the United Kingdom. U.S. allies in the Pacific see China as an economic and therefore military power in the face of growing conflict in the region, which U.S. presence has balanced. According to Reuters, the United Kingdom and other European countries are frustrated with the U.S. Congress, which brought International Monetary Fund voting rights reform to a halt, subsequently giving LDCs little say in economic global governance. The BBC suggested that the reason why the UK wanted to join AIIB was no less simple than wanting to join the Caribbean Development Bank. China is one of the world's fastest-growing markets, if not the fastest, so why not invest? Chinese news agencies were equally as amused. Xinhua news agency called the U.S. skepticism and criticism over the move paranoid and childish, and it threatens to weaken U.S. ties with China.
While China does have much capital to spend and a growing economy, what it hopes to gain from the new bank is a way to put funds where they will do the most good and to create better investment capital. In other words, to allow all countries in the region to both make and save money. The basic premise to have the bank is to build infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific region in a way to supplement where the World Bank and IMF have left unfunded. AIIB is a reflection of China's frustration with the aforementioned banks, which they considered slow and too bureaucratic. On the one hand, more financial competition is good in a capitalist economic model. On the other hand, financial competition can equalize the military balance of power in a region, neutralizing it or even unbalancing it in favor of one country. AIIB leaders have promised to keep the bank transparent and honest in its proceedings as it moves forward. This is Vaughn Rogers reporting for the Global Current.
Blythe Brady discusses the meeting of EU education ministers in Paris to discuss curbing radicalization in European schools.
The year 2015 has already become the year radical movements gain traction and attention within Europe. From the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January to the Copenhagen shootings in February and the ongoing trend of European citizens migrating to join the Islamic State movement in Syria and Iraq, a disturbing pattern has emerged which the European Union as a whole feels the need to address. With these events and the growing anti-immigration strain amongst many member states' populations, the ministers of education from the EU member states met in Paris on Monday to discuss the strategies to combat radical movements taking root in youths across their countries. This two-day meeting brought together education ministers, state secretaries, and representatives of all 28 EU member states, as well as the French President François Hollande and the European Commissioner for Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, Tibor Navraskis, reports the Financial. On the agenda was a document signed by nearly 100 teachers from the EU member states entitled A Manifesto for Education, Empowering Educators in Schools, which lobbied for specific training to help teachers recognize radicalization at an early stage, according to Al Jazeera. The manifesto was supported by the Radicalization Awareness Network, an umbrella network for teachers, social workers, health officials, and others in Europe who engage with at-risk youths. As manager director at the Qualim Foundation, which is a counter-extremism think tank, Haras Rafiq discussed on Sky News this issue is not solely the domain of security forces.
One of the things we have to realise is we can't legislate our way out of this problem. We can't outsource the problem that we've got to the police and to our security services. Their jobs really are to make sure that the country is safe and to stop somebody just at the point before they may well be committing an illegal act or a crime. This is a problem for society at large.
One strategy the Radicalization Awareness Network, or RAN, advocates is training educators with the tools and skills to engage students in a dialogue at the early stage of the problem. This includes fostering a familiarity with online platforms and social media where recruiters are known to be active, as well as creating support hotlines for teachers to discuss techniques, reports Al Jazeera. At the same time, the teachers who signed the manifesto believe that it would be advantageous to open the discussions in the classroom to include extremist materials and offer alternative narratives as a method to engage, debate, and challenge these ideas. Additionally, this would offer a more open setting of discussion, which could allow a student who feels he or she holds a marginalized viewpoint to engage with peers, as stated in the manifesto. Finally, and uniquely, the teachers suggested putting students holding more radical or extremist views in touch with NGOs and other organizations who provide aid and emergency relief to refugees in Syria and Iraq as a way to challenge the students' feelings of injustice. On Tuesday, the assembled representatives of the EU member states in Paris adopted a declaration on promoting citizenship and common values of freedom, tolerance, and non-discrimination through education, reports the Financial. The declaration calls for Europe as a whole to prevent and tackle marginalization, intolerance, racism, and radicalization in schools. While acknowledging these issues cross borders, the European Commission reaffirmed the fact that educational systems remain the responsibility of individual national governments. The European Commission also points out that there are existing EU tools which could be used to reinforce social cohesion and active citizenship at a time when more than 4,000 young people have left Europe for Syria to join armed groups such as the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. One such program at the EU's disposal is the Erasmus Plus program, which provides cross-border projects and could provide avenues for marginalized citizens to gain skills, experience, and confidence. The meeting in Paris last week served as an informal discussion in the lead-up to the Educational Council, which will be held this May in Brussels. Both meetings were called for following the Paris and Copenhagen attacks earlier this year. It is clear that the leaders of the European Union member states see education as a key to combating radicalization among the younger generations across the continent. Additionally, as the manifesto suggests, educators in Europe also feel a sense of responsibility to engage their students and help those students with marginalized views feel included and heard. Innovative strategies and techniques outlined in the manifesto should be seriously considered at the formal Education Council held later this year, as well as considered by other countries facing similar challenges. Furthermore, the meetings of the EU education ministers could foster further cooperation and joint programs, which would help further the integration of the European Union, a continued goal of the European Commission. At a time when Europe is struggling on multiple fronts, it is an encouraging sign to see innovation and joint efforts in such a fundamental field as education. Reporting for the Global Current, this is Blythe Brady.
Finally, the Global Current talks to a panel of Seton Hall diplomacy students who recently studied abroad during a spring break trip to Ethiopia.
Good morning, Global Current listeners. I'm Bill Golda, the executive producer of Global Current, and I had, over the last week, the opportunity, through the School of Diplomacy here at Seton Hall University, to take a trip to Ethiopia for a course, a 3-credit course on the African Union, and came back so excited about it that I brought in 2 of my compatriots, 2 of my colleagues who went on the trip with me. We're going to tell you guys about it. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, my name is John Pollack, and I'm a grad student here at the School of Diplomacy at Seton Hall, and I went on the trip to Ethiopia with Bill. It was amazing.
And my name is Abram Dawood. I'm an undergraduate at Seton Hall, and I also went on the trip.
So where are you guys from originally?
I'm from the Boston area, a small town called Belmont. You may know it for having Mitt Romney as a resident, unfortunately, but, we do what we can there.
I'm from Cairo, Egypt, so you may know it from the pyramids and...
Oh, that place, yeah.
That
might have heard of it once or twice.
I'm not familiar.
Oh.
So tell me, how did you guys hear about the trip, and what made you guys want to go?
Well, actually, I heard about these types of trips when I was considering coming to the school. It was one of the reasons I decided to apply, because it sounded like a great opportunity. So I was just waiting to find out which travel seminars were going to be offered while I was here. And of the 2, they did Catholic peacekeeping as well, and Italy. And this one sounded more interesting to me, so I signed right up.
I found out about this trip because I got an email from Susie Q, also known as Susan Malcolm, which is the Secretary of Diplomacy. I got really, really, really interested in the African Union as well as Ethiopia, so I decided to go. My background includes a lot of relationship with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I am Coptic Orthodox, and that's our sister church, so when I heard that they were offering a trip to Ethiopia, I was pretty excited so I could visit lots of historical churches and monasteries in the site.
Well, yeah, and that's something that we started off the trip with. We went up into the north of the country, which is kind of the heart of the ancient Ethiopian culture and empire. So what did that mean to you to be there?
When we went to Lalibela, which is another city up in the north, Lalibela was a beautiful city, and it was very, very high in the mountains, and we visited a lot of rock-hewn churches, which are churches that were carved into mountains. It was a beautiful experience. The paintings on the churches are still original. Everything from the churches have symbolism to it. There's symbols everywhere when you enter Lalibela, and it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah, and how old are those churches? When were built?
They were around 700 years old, 700 years and older. if I'm not mistaken, right?
So. That sounds about right to me. If we're wrong, someone will probably let us know.
So what was the highlight of the trip for you guys?
Well, for me, the highlight of the trip was twofold. Seeing the Ethiopian Museum with all the famous hominid fossils, such as Lucy and the Ardipithecus skeleton known as Ardi in some circles. And then on the last day when we drove through the Rift Valley and visited the archaeological sites there and got to see some of the habitation levels that they've left open from Homo erectus hippopotamus butchering sites. That was pretty exciting to me. I should mention that I studied paleoanthropology as an undergrad, so it was more interesting to me than some. I got a lot of questions about why we were looking at this big pile of boulders and what it meant and why anyone would care.
So as long as you brought it up, why were we looking at the big pile of boulders, and why should anyone care?
Well, it gives you an idea how this species of hominid lived and what sort of things they did in their day-to-day life. So we were able to see their tools laid out, and you could see debitage left over from making the stone tools. Debitage is just a fancy archaeologist word for junk or trash. And, there were bones left from where they were butchering these animals, so you could tell that they were hunting large animals and eating them and maintaining their, well, not as large as ours, but large comparative to all hominids that came before them, brains.
Yeah, so this is about 800,000 years ago, they were saying?
Yeah, Homo erectus was around for a long time.
Yeah.
I think that particular killing floor was around 800,000 years ago.
Yeah, so it's crazy to think that, we were walking where our early ancestors were walking so long ago.
Yeah, it really is, and then it's just sitting right there, pretty much the way they left it.
That's great. So what about you, Abram?
Well, I wouldn't say not just walking, but running. I remember everyone got into the bus and we started pulling away. And then Shirley, another person that went on the trip with us, was like, "Bill, we forgot Bill."
Yes.
It's true. This show almost didn't happen. Bill was almost a permanent resident.
Yes, almost got left behind on a cliff overlooking the Great Rift Valley. Yeah, we stopped for photo opportunity, and I went off. I told everyone, "Hey, going off over here to take some photos," and everyone said, "Okay, that's great," and went back on the bus and started to drive away. So
Bill's a forgettable guy.
So it would seem. But at least one of you had the decency to look around and say, "Oh, hey, we're missing one." So it wasn't just for the cultural reasons and that we were there, although that I guess for me personally, I went into it expecting the highlights for me to be very much the academic side of things, but I wound up being very much taken with Ethiopian history and culture and the prehistory that we saw. But there also was the academic component of it. Can you guys talk about where we went and what the highlights were for you guys there?
For me, the highlight was actually visiting the United States Embassy in Addis. A huge shout out to Colonel Wyatt. Our presentation at the United States Embassy was amazing, and we talked about a lot of conflicts in Africa. It was just a great experience being taught by someone who had over 40 years of military experience in Africa.
Yeah, that presentation was very impressive. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was expecting the U.S. Embassy to be more of a dry sort of experience where you were just given what they were told to tell you, and then that's it. But no, it was very informative. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had the same impression. It really sticks with you that this is someone who's telling it as it is, which is in the world of government service is often very rare to find.
Yes, it is, especially in the diplomatic corps, I think.
Yeah.
It was also nice because during our second presentation, we had a diplomat by the name of Antoine give us our presentation. But Colonel Wyatt didn't want to leave the room after he was done presenting. He decided to stay, and he decided to input his opinions with the diplomats in the room, even though his time was done. And it showed that he cared. And it's something that you don't see a lot, because when you have an allotted space of time to talk, you talk and then you leave. But he decided to stay. He decided to talk to us after we were done too. So that was an amazing experience.
But then, in addition to the U.S. Embassy, we went to a few other places. We went to visit Oxfam International to find out how they interrelate with the UN, the AU, and the U.S. there. We went to the United Nations Commission for Africa to find out how they work in Africa, and then I guess the big highlight was the trip to the African Union. We spent a full morning and afternoon at the African Union getting briefings from some high-level officials. I'm interested, what were you guys' takeaway from that?
My takeaway was just how happy they all were to meet with us. I think a lot of times when you meet with officials in that sort of setting in other parts of the world, they are not necessarily upset to be meeting with you, but it's not the highlight of their day, and they're often looking at their watches. But it seemed that everyone we met with in the African Union was generally excited we were there and really wanted to engage with us, and it was a big part of their day, and they'd put a lot of effort into the presentations they gave us. It was really refreshing.
Even the director of political affairs, after we were done with our briefings, we couldn't have time to be briefed by him because he had to step aside into another meeting. But while we were touring the AU, he ran to us and he sat us down in the council area, and then he started talking to us and he started asking us questions, and it was an amazing experience how someone who didn't have time for you made time for you. And it shows the level of caring, how much they cared for us as students.
Yeah, and that was my impression of that gentleman, too, is that he was another person who was very much a straight shooter, that he gave it to you as it was, very much like Colonel Wyatt. Yeah, Africa is making great strides and great progress, but there's still a long way to go. And I guess from the trip as a whole, that was my major takeaway, is that there's so much progress and prosperity side by side with such abject poverty, and oftentimes right in the same block. What do you guys think about your overall impressions for the trip?
I was impressed by the incredible amount of buildings being put up. The construction there is just going on a staggering level.
China has invested billions of dollars into Ethiopia as well as Africa. The entire AU compound, which was beautiful, was all gifted by China, and you can see how much China is investing in that country and how fast that country is growing. I plan on coming back within 5 years and just seeing how much the country has grown.
It's really going to be quite something to see. They're looking at connecting high-speed rail between the major cities, linking at least all of the capitals of the African countries together with high-speed rail, and China is a world leader in that. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
It will be. I think they're going to be successful. I just want to touch on the school we visited there, an elementary school in was it in Lalibela?
Lalibela.
In Lalibela, yeah. While we were there, giving them gifts and meeting with them, I picked up a test that was from a 7th grade class that was sitting on the desk. It was a science test. There's lots of chemistry and physics on it. And it was pretty impressive. It was not anything I could have handled in the 7th grade.
Yeah, I looked at that test too. I actually showed it to John, and I was just like, oh God, I'd fail this.
But yeah, it shows a great deal of potential coming up. There's heavy investment in the schools there. The entire continent is on the rise just like that, and I think that's the message that was really hammered home to all of us. So I'll give you guys the last word.
Well, coming off that same ideas that Bill was just talking about, I think a lot of the perceptions we have of Africa are because of the pictures we see. And, you can frame a story or a narrative to say anything you want about Africa. Those pictures that you see are real, but next to that might be a modern mid-rise building or a school. Africa is sort of a contradictory place at the moment. There's great hope, there's still abject poverty, but to only focus on the poverty would be a mistake.
And like you said, there's a lot of hope in Africa. We were talking about the Ebola crisis as well, and it was the AU that supplied all the medical doctors. It wasn't the United States. It wasn't Asia. It wasn't Europe. They just supplied funds. But the African Union was the group that supplied all the 800 medical doctors. So the AU has been doing lots of work, and they're not getting a lot of credit for it. We should give credit to where it's due, and the AU has been doing lots of good work.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you guys so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
On The Global Current, this is Bill Golba along with Avram Dawood and John Pollock. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Karina Taylor.
And I'm Alex Krause.
We'll see you next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Bill Golba. Our co-executive producers are Daniel Garay and Alicia Sharabali. Our technical producer is Evan Doolittle. Our news and analysis editors are Gabriela Taveras and Catherine Beebe. The theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. This has been the Global Current on WSOU, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.